Hello and welcome to our podcast, episode 2 of Technology and Discipleship. Today we're going to talk about concerns, facts versus fiction, some things that you've maybe heard that have been concerning. We'll get into that. My name is Blake Davis. I am the Executive Director of Marketing and Delivery, which is also serves as our communications and the AI lead at Discipleship Ministries. The perspective that I try to bring to this is me being a bit of a tech nerd, essentially, and just really geeking out about the technology that hopefully allows me to sort of break down a bit of how it thinks to be able to interpret that for your use in ministry.
My name's Scott Hughes. I'm the Associate General Secretary for Discipleship Ministries. I think I bring to this pastoral experience, having served 2 different appointments for a total of 13 years in the North Georgia Annual Conference, hopefully bringing a bit of biblical and theological engagement as well.
That is great. Well, we're excited to be here for episode 2. Thank you for coming back. It's good to have you. And Scott, let's hop right in here. Our purpose here is to sort of distinguish between the facts and the fiction. We hear a lot of things. We've done some workshops. We've done some trainings at annual conferences. Social media posts. Scott has written some great articles titled things like "Will AI Write My Sermon?" So we'll get into that, and we want to kind of jump into this. So tell me, one of our first talking points here, Scott, is hallucinations. Define that a little bit for me. Talk about the effects. Talk about how we. You used the phrase as we were planning this, leaning into it, which I think is a really great thing. So unpack hallucinations for us.
So understanding how these work is really helpful. One of the things about these LLMs is they want to please you. They want to give you an answer. And so you have to know on the front end, if you ask it for something, it's going to give it to you, whether it has to make it up or not. And sometimes it will. I've seen it make up email addresses. I've seen it make stuff up. That's what it does, because it thinks you want a definitive answer. Now, knowing that, I think we then can mitigate that, right? And Blake has written some really helpful prompt templates, and part of that prompt template can be, don't make anything up, or can you explain your reasoning, how you got to this answer? So you can mitigate the hallucinations. And yes, Blake, I said lean into it. One of the neat things about these LLMs is how creative they can be. And so lean into how creative they can be. It's fun to get a prompt and say, make this more engaging. Make this 1,000 times more engaging. Make this 1,000 times more creative. Right? Let it go off in making some weird connections for you to really help creativity. So yes, there's absolutely a downside to how these were done, and that it does hallucinate. But if you know that, you can mitigate it, and then you can use it for your advantage. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
Absolutely. And I just want to specify as well, when if you're brand new to large language models, when Scott says the prompt, that's what we're talking about. Is the prompt is anything you put into that chat. That's it. That's the basic prompt. Now, we have prompt templates that we share in our classes, and we go really deep into that in our advanced workshop that starts in 3 weeks. You still have time to sign up if you want to. We'll give a little shameless plug there. But you can specify in those prompts, as Scott said, don't make things up. You can specify, if you are unsure about something, don't make anything up, but ask me. So it really comes down to what you describe it to do. So that's a bit about hallucinations. Let's move towards AI biases. Talk to me about that's a big concern as well, a valid one.
It is.
Open that up a little bit.
Yeah, you may have some stuff to add here, but again, how these were created is off of our information. Really good information and comments from YouTube and other places where you don't always want to read the comments. Yes, it brings bias. So if you create an image of a CEO, you're likely to get a man. It's really unfortunate, but that's there. Again, you can mitigate this in terms of how you prompt it. That's the nuts and bolts. I would add this. The way I hear people talk about, I'm not going to use it, it's biased, as if they're not biased. Like, we're all biased. If we get a group of people together to brainstorm something, they're all going to bring their biases into this. So just using an LLM or not using it because it has bias, I don't think is helpful. I think if you know that going into it, you can alleviate a lot of that and mitigate it with prompting, and just recognizing it when you see it. And these large language model companies are trying more and more to reduce this. So it'll get better and better over time, I have no doubt. What would you add to that, Blake?
I mean, I would say I've never heard somebody say, I don't use Google because there's biased things on Google. That's not, you're searching a database of human-made information, or Facebook. I'm not going to post anything because other people post biased things. It all comes down to your prompt, and that's what we're here for. That's what the courses we do and the trainings we do are for, is if you let it do your work for you, it's going to do an algorithmic calculation of what the most common denominator of what you're asking it to do is. So if you put in, make an image of Jesus, well, if it's leaning on a lot of Catholic data, which has a lot of data out there, probably, no offense to the Catholic Church whatsoever, but most of the imagery of Jesus is not exactly a biblically unattractive Middle Eastern man. And so it's going to try to be helpful and give you what it thinks it should do if you ask it to do your work for you. And that's where prompting comes in. If you specify, you should never just ask any kind of AI tool, but any large language model, to say, do this for me. You should say, I want you to do X, Y, Z, build this out in this way, and prompt it and instruct it like that. So as Scott said, they're trying to mitigate that, but just be aware that it's leaning on a conglomeration of billions of algorithmic pieces of data created by humans. So I don't think it's fair to say, well, AI is biased, so don't use it. Humans are biased, so don't talk to humans. Like that's, that's, right. It's a tough thing to really address, but that would be an overall statement.
But it is a myth out there that I've heard.
Yeah. But it's not a myth. There's truth to it, but it's
true.
The amount of problem is a myth, and the fact that we can't do anything about it is a myth, because it all comes down to how you prompt it. So, so let's talk about the limitations, because this is a very big thing that people. Just a couple of days ago, a friend of mine, they said, "Hey, you're the AI guy. I asked it to do this, and I was not impressed with what it gave me." And I said, "Well, you're asking it to do something that it's not really built for." So talk a minute, Scott, about the limitations, the technical boundaries.
You might be better served than me to talk about this one in terms of, you're right in the sense that it has its limitations. It does create, I think it is really helpful brainstorming. It's really helpful generating things. Is it great at it? Probably not, but it's really good at it. It does have limitations that are, what's amazing to me is how quickly some of these limitations are getting eclipsed. But I wish it connected to more to other apps and did more things. There is certainly limitations to it. You say more about this.
I mean, it's hard to just give a list of limitations, because it's probably more useful that we should do a podcast, another episode probably, about what it is really good at. And in our episode 3 in 2 weeks that we're going to post, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to use it in ways that are helpful, that it's really good at. But the limitations, you just have to realize that this is an emerging technology. There's a lot that's still being developed. Anytime that we've hit a point where I've said, oh, I wish it did X, Y, Z, thus far for a lot of those things, weeks later, it did it well. So just be aware that very, very, very long context windows. Essentially, if you fed it a 80-page document, it's probably not going to remember what's on page 1 and 2 by the time it gets to page 40. I say that though, and at the time, that we started using it, it was maybe 3 pages. And then, one of these platforms did what's called a needle in the haystack test, where they put a random piece of information into, I think it was something like an 80-page document. And the technology said, hey, we noticed that you put this random piece of information in here, and it was so out of place that we had to assume that this was an Easter egg you put in here to trick us to try and see if we would find it, which is a level. That's what the AI said.
Responded with,
which is a level of comprehension.
So if anyone hears,
it's incredible.
That you hear, sorry to interrupt, you hear token window.
Token window.
That's what that's referring to. The larger the token window, the more it can remember, if that's the right word. It can ingest. If you hear the words token window, that in Gemini, extremely large token window, probably the largest of all the platforms right now, they continue to improve how it's able to do that.
Probably a week from now, that will no longer be the case. It'll probably be something else. But
that won't be true by the time this is posted.
It's true. To understand tokens a little bit, the best I heard it from a podcast that I wish I could quote, I wish I could remember which one it was it's trying to find algorithmic assumptions of the most common connections between words. So if you said, brew me a cup, with no context, it's probably going to say tea, because statistically, that's probably the word that would follow brew me a cup. But if you said, I'm in a coffee shop and I want you to brew me a cup, it's going to assume that context is coffee. And if you wanted it to say, brew me a cup of, revolutionary ideas, it's probably, that's such a wide algorithmic statistical data point to get to that next phrase, it uses more tokens to get there. So that's what we mean by tokens. That's
I'll add a bit of nerdiness there too. And tokens are almost like a word, but a little bit less than a word.
Mm-hmm.
And what it's doing is then converting words into numbers to then build those patterns and do its math, right?
Yes.
That's what it's doing, is math. And it's got to convert words into tokens and that into numbers, and numbers, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stop.
No. And the reason I wanted to dive into that is to sort of also tie into the hallucinations and the bias, because you got to understand it's not biased. It's finding algorithmic mathematical connections between
based on
words.
Probabilities. Yeah.
Based on probabilities. So I feel like we didn't really answer the limitations, because that's probably its own episode. So we'll just say there are limitations, play with it. And at some point we can talk about the limitations and what it's really good at. So moving on to, that will make more sense as we move to the next few pieces, which is ethical. Talk to me about the ethical considerations of AI. And I will point to, we have just approved our AI policy for our organization. So if you'd like to see that, reach out to us, because we've tried to outline, and that's probably going to change every 3 months too, because the technology is growing so fast, but we're trying to outline some really appropriate guidelines for use for it. But Scott, why don't you talk to us about perspectives, ethical use, and some potential guidelines there?
Yeah, I think the question that's come up is it unethical to use AI in ministry? And I think part of the concern here is plagiarism. If I quote something, and part of this is just the way we're academically formed. We've got to credit things. And part of it is the ethics of, if Blake says something profound and then I rip it off as my own, which I do all the time. I'm just kidding, Blake. You do say profound things, but I don't rip them off without giving you credit, right? That's what I would do, is give you credit. I would say, my friend Blake said this thing. It's the right thing to do, to give credit to. And it's hard to do that with these LLMs, because you don't know exactly, you don't know where it's pulling from. And so, because it's using all that, making math out of it, and generating something new. So you don't know exactly where it's generating from, which is why you need to stay in the loop. You need to adjust, make it your voice, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a bit of grayness here. I think is the best way I could say it. Is it unethical? I don't think so. But I do think
depends on how you use it.
It depends on how you use it. And I do think we need to be transparent with our ministry, other ministry leaders, to say, here's how I'm using it. Here's why I'm using it. Here's why I'm not just cutting and pasting, and it's not just writing sermons for me. It's not just doing these things for me, but it is assisting me in how I do it. I hope that answers, because this definitely could be a whole podcast series.
It will have to be
in terms of ethics, and because there's so much involved, because none of us are blank slates. Things that I'm saying right now are because I've been influenced by all sorts of factors, and I don't even consciously know all those factors. So anyway, that's a really short segment on something that could be much, much longer.
It is. And I hope you're not feeling we're doing a disservice in this episode. That is its entire, Scott said, could be an entire series. This is us wanting to give a very brief overview in episode 2 of many episodes incoming. So I would just ask, are you trying to get it to do your work for you? Are you trying to, the big thing I say in my courses is, if a member of your church found out that you use an AI technology to the level that you did without you telling them, would they be offended? And just consider that, because there's not really an ethical boundary there, that's more relationship. That's you encompassing and thinking through, okay, well, it helped me structure and fact check and data check and, grammar check an email.
Sure.
That's probably fine. It wrote the entire email that I sent to the congregation and I hid that fact. Well, there might be some people that are offended by that. And that's where you have to be in charge of your own use. And something that we say continually is anything that you have in artificial intelligence, we mostly talk about large language models here because that's kind of the height of the technology at this current point.
Yeah.
But anything that you create, that you put out into the world, your name is on it. You are responsible for its accuracy, for its usage, for its transparency. So just keep that in mind. We can't tell you what you should do. We can tell you what we as an agency are prioritizing. But are you trying to copy and rip people off without credit? Are you trying to get it to do your work for you without telling anybody how you're getting it to do that work? And walk through that. So I'm going to give a shameless plug for our advanced AI workshop because we go much deeper in our advanced AI. You still have a couple weeks if you would like to join that and sign up. We actually help you develop your organization's policy for AI use. But what I will briefly move into is I'll just describe a piece of that is we designed the outline of, I'll take credit if I don't mind, put my name on it. I created 3 categories of trying to describe AI use. And the first part is category 1 is human generated with AI assistance. Let's just say that we could put Microsoft Word into this and partially to say, oh, well, I wrote the document. It helped me to look at the formatting. It helped me with the fact checking, the data, the grammar, etc. But I wrote that. Then you have the second category, which is human generated and AI generated collaboratively. So human and AI collaboratively generated. So that could be something like the work is a bit 50-50. And I have a hard time with this because I'll be working on a prompt and some kind of AI development. And, you get a month and 18 chat pages in. I can't really often tell what ideas were mine, what ideas were the large language models.
It's a chat.
Because it's a chat. You're going back and forth. And
yes,
my big life hack for prompting is having it ask me questions. Say, ask me a minimum of 5 questions to help me refine what I want out of this. Now, if it had not asked me those questions, would it have really stewarded those ideas in me? Where's that line? Where's that line of what is mine and what is it? So anyway, then category 3 is
great
AI generated with human assisted. And that's just, most of the technology is not there yet. Most of our technology has not gotten to the point where it can do the work. And I would posit at this time, especially, it should not do the work, but we're trying to get ahead of that. So I don't want to get too deep in that, but those are some categories. There's a shameless plug for our advanced AI course. Please go over there and check it out if you're interested. It's a 6-week thing with a whole group of people. And that's one of the things we do in session 2 is help you develop your policy. So anyway, without getting too deep into that, back to it. I would love to kind of keeping the tokens in mind that we mentioned in the previous section of talking about limitations, going into ethics and sliding into intellectual property concerns. You'll see why I'm mentioning tokens in a second. A common question and concern we get, Scott, is will AI steal my sermons? Talk to me about that. Will AI steal my sermon?
It won't. It's not how the technology works. And, with all this, fact check Blake and I, but as I understand how this works, is pre-trained, right? So if you put in a sermon, hey, help me, I've written this manuscript, help me make it better, so if I put that in, is Blake going to be able to go and steal that sermon? The answer is no. It's pre-trained, right? It's already got its information. It's got sermons galore from all over. That's one. And then 2, if it were to actually then use that in training for the next model, it's going to do that with thousands, millions of other sermons. And again, it's going to generate through probability and algorithms what it generates. It will not completely replicate, even if you said, write a sermon like Scott Hughes, which no idea why you would ever do that. But if you did that, because I've put in sermons in there, you're not going to get that sermon. you're not going to probably even get close to that sermon. So I have no fears about using it in that way because I don't feel like it's going to steal what I'm putting into it.
No, it will take the billions of data points to try and, again, find those tokens, those statistical reference points between language. You would be far more at risk. I would say multiplications upon multiplications more at risk of having your sermon stolen if you put it on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram, because you have no idea who's going to watch that in its entirety and say, oh, I like that. I'm going to use that on my Sunday sermon. It just I would say be at ease with that. It's, as Scott said, even if you say, try to write this exact sermon I did, it's going to try to make up the information to write it fresh anyway. So I understand why that's a concern. I would say be at ease. That's not really a thing. But intellectual property is a overall concern. That's it. And that comes into a bit of a quandary and conversation of what is the basis of creativity and art. And there's a lot of laws that are trying to catch up, like the Elvis law here in Nashville that is going into action to protect artists' voices for music generation and writers. But it does, I don't know, Scott, how deep do you want to dive in there? Why don't you?
That's good. That's good.
Okay, great.
Let's keep moving.
We can discuss that in another episode. But so fact versus fiction. Another question that we've gotten that Scott wrote a very good article that I would point you to read about is my pastor going to become lazy because they're using AI tools?
No is a short answer to that one. That's comments we saw on social media that, oh, great. And then the exact comment was something along the lines of when we promoted our Harnessing AI webinar series, oh, great, my pastor will just steal their sermons from AI and they have every Sunday off now too, or something to that effect.
Easy.
And it saddened me because I'm going to use the word ignorance of what a pastor actually does during the week. Number one. Number two, it doesn't function that way. It's not, you can get a sermon right now off the internet. You don't need AI to do that. But it can greatly enhance, I'm of the belief it can greatly enhance sermon preparation, sermon delivery, sermon flow. That's just on sermons. And again, it can help with all sorts of other administrative tasks. So lazy is a whole issue that if you're Methodist, have with your SPRC, your Staff Parish Relations Committee. There needs to be a conversation there about what you actually do if they think you have all week off. That you know that not to be true. You experience it. You don't need me to tell you that. So no. That's my short answer. Just no, it's not going to make pastors lazy. They're not lazy to begin with. No one goes into ministry and is sitting around doing nothing.
That's for sure.
I'm going to stop.
My question to you, the listener, or anyone thinking that or concerned about that would be, if you heard that your pastor had the opportunity to sit with an assistant to help ideate and do a better job preparing their sermon and their tasks with excellence so that they had more capacity and time to sit with the grieving widow, to disciple, to engage their community more, would you be against that idea? Would you be against the idea of them having someone to help them with those daily tasks, not do them for them, not write their sermon? Because if your pastor's having AI write their entire sermon, that they're not.
Well, they
that's
were
an inappropriate
just
use.
Stealing.
They were priced
sermons.
probably. That's right. A deeper issue.
The fundamental is a trust issue. That's fundamentally what's at play here is a trust issue between the pastors, what the pastor's doing versus what people think they're doing.
Absolutely. So I would just posit that. I would say, think about that. Our goal with this podcast is to help equip so that there is more time for intentional discipleship and one-on-one relationship. That's something that this tool can really help with, just like a typewriter could help, just like a computer and a keyboard could help, just like a tractor could help a farmer. If you're using it in a way that is appropriate, I mean, tractors can run over people. Does that mean that we shouldn't use tractors? Well, it means that we should use it appropriately, that we should use it well. So that would be my question in response to that. So we've gone about 20 minutes here. So why don't we, Scott, what I would say is, why don't we sum up here the fact versus fiction? No, it's not going to make your pastor lazy unless they're already lazy, and that's a deeper issue. Yes, it does hallucinate sometimes. Statistically speaking, it hallucinates way less than a human, but it is something that you should know about and can lean into as something that could be useful. Sometimes it is biased, but if it is biased, it's likely because you haven't prompted it well and you're wanting it to do the work for you. And the big question, though, this is what we'll probably wrap up with, is will it replace me? Will AI replace humans, and will I lose my job?
Short answer, no. That's my belief. I mean, I know there have been people much smarter than me who have predicted so many jobs are going to be lost by AI. I'm not an optimist in that sense. I think for the next decade or so, it's going to be very much an augmentation tool. It's going to help us. It's going to assist us. And then longer term, I'll be curious what kind of jobs it drastically changes, because it may change higher paying jobs more so than lower paying jobs.
What it's looking like.
Doctors, lawyers, accountants, those things, engineers, those are some of the jobs I think are going to change drastically. Will it take jobs? I don't know. I'm not as optimistic as others are about that. We have this weird thing, talking about biases. We think what other people do, we reduce that to something very simple, when really what other people do is much more nuanced than what we believe. And so it's very easy to say, oh, it'll do that, because we don't know the nuances of that job. So that's why I'm not as optimistic about that. So
that's well said. I like that, the nuance. I would say that it...
That's I didn't mention ministry, by the way. Sorry to interrupt.
That's true. That's very true.
It will not. It can, and I can get a little on a soapbox about it cannot replace care, and we as the church should, I think, to be at the forefront of that, of relationships. That's human care. That's human work. Work's not the right word. Responsibility, maybe. That's our role. I'm pretty passionate about that. So no, it can't replace ministry. It cannot replace mentoring, discipleship. It can't replace that. It won't replace that. That's a soapbox I could really get on, but I'm not going to.
Yeah. It can enhance. It can help. It can. I mean, imagine if you try to host an in-person connection, or let's just say a speed dating for your singles group. I don't know. It can, what it can do is it can, I didn't mean to get there, but let's just say an event, a connection event, a discipleship event. It can enhance the structure of optimizing and organizing those details so that you have more time in person to be face-to-face. And that's what we're trying to do, is say, how can we help it give you more capacity to have the face-to-face, to do the thing that it will never be able to do, which is sit, hold hands, cry with someone, dance with someone, rejoice with someone. That's what we're hoping this can do. It doesn't have
personhood, no matter how much it sounds like a person, not a person. That's why we have to be careful with language. Like, even when I say, well, it thinks this way. Thinks to me is a weird word. Talks, those human attributes, it's really easy to personify this technology because it can sound human. And I think we do need to resist that a little bit. Yeah. And it is a machine. Yeah. It's a really advanced, really cool machine. It's a machine. And let's be clear about that. Again, I'm trying to avoid the thoughts on this.
That's good. And for the replacement, I think my answer for the replacing human jobs would be it's hard to take right now because we're in the middle of it. But historically, every point where a great technology has come to the table, think about the loom. When the loom was invented, it put a whole bunch of textile designers, I don't even know the right terminology, out of work. And if I remember my history right, they burned down the factory because they were so against it. But that was one of the ignition points for the Industrial Revolution. And the amount of jobs that invented, coming down to even just smartphones, would not have happened. A lot of people posit would not have happened with the invention of that piece of technology that initially caused some disruption.
Or a tractor.
Or a tractor, absolutely.
The reason I like the tractor analogy is it does work. There's better things to put to use for humans. Well, I said that terribly. We can do better, more creative things. And that's my hope for AI, is to let machines do machine work and humans do human work. And so I'm with you in the sense of it's going to create jobs as well, and that's not being
There will
talked
be
about enough.
disruption, unfortunately.
Absolutely, it
There
is
will
a
be.
disruptive technology.
Yeah, I'm sure that when the tractor was invented, the people who were out hand picking items were not thrilled about it at the time. Looking back
probably were
now,
okay with
oh, maybe. I mean, it depends.
Right, there were some that absolutely
some
were
that-
absolutely
yeah.
I mean, I think both and right. It will eliminate some jobs. I think that's true.
It will, absolutely.
But it
Also,
will create jobs as well.
when the smartphone came out, there were a lot of people that were saying this will eliminate jobs, but the amount of technological advancements and developments and apps and platforms and industries that have grown out of that have given so many more jobs. So I would say if it's a concern, it's a very valid concern. Also, looking at the data historically, this should not, might cause some disruption initially, but if history is anything to speak, this will be a even more expansive ability to move humanity to having even more opportunity. So that's the idea. The thing I'll end with is, if you've heard of Khan Academy, Sal Khan, who's the creator of Khan Academy, did a very good TED Talk about how this is the great democratizer of information, because there are kids who do not have access to any kind of study partner, any kind of coach, any kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Customizable learning.
Yeah.
And they have now made a LLM chatbot that is specifically built to help students learn better. And it is having...
Is that the Conmigo?
I think that's the name of it, Conmigo. But if you want to look that up, go just search a Sal Khan TED Talk AI, and he's very optimistic about its ability to level the playing field a bit for access to education. And that's what I lean on is, could this level the playing field a bit for access to different ideas and business owners, kids and people from low-income countries who want to do something great, but this gives access for it. So
it's a pretty optimistic note to end on, right? We've gone through some of the more, myths, and I hope there's probably myths you've heard of. I would love for you to comment.
Please.
Tell us what myths you've heard of, because I'm sure we'll do a second episode of other things we've heard in terms of myths. And so let us know in the comments what myths you're hearing about AI. And maybe you don't even know if it's a myth. Maybe you don't know if it's true or not. And you just want us to give some comment. We'll do our best to research that and give the best answer we can to help you talk with your folks about how to use this well and think about this ethically.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. I'll give a last plug, because we do have time for you to join if you want to do our Harnessing AI, which is our beginners webinar. It's a 2-part webinar. Or our Advanced AI, which is Advanced AI for Ministry. It's a 6-week gathering. We have a Slack channel that all of these different ministry leaders are in, and it goes deep into the persona creation, into prompting, into prompt templating, into policy creation. So you still have time for that. Right? And there is a CEU that you will qualify for if you do your homework in that workshop. So please feel free, check that out. You still have time to sign up. This next episode, we're going to talk about, as we said, just some kind of tips and ways that you can use it to optimize productivity. That will go out on the 28th. So please go ahead and sign up for this. Subscribe to this podcast, reach out, and we'll just, we're glad to have you here. Scott and I are having fun. Hopefully this is helpful, and let us know if it is or is not, and if there are specific topics that you would like us to prioritize, because we have a long list of different things to talk about. We would love to prioritize the ones that you feel would be most useful. So with that, thank you so much. Continue listening, continue using this for good, and hopefully in a way that allows you to have more capacity for discipleship. Many thanks. Great to have you here, and we will see you on the next one.